Thank you. Welcome to this evening's Audit Committee of September 11th. Have we got any apologies for absence, please? There's no apologies. May I sign the record of the meeting held on the 31st of July as correct? Thank you. I don't have any urgent matters. Is anybody on the floor? Thank you. There are no urgent matters for this meeting. Are there any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests or other significant interests, please? Councillor Hackwell, thank you.
Just because the lease issue is mentioned in the paper, and I'm a trustee of a charity that leases a building from Medway Council, I just declare that to be openness.
Thank you for the transparency, Councillor Hackwell. Anybody else? Thank you. We move on to item 5, the Speak Up, Anti-Bribery and Anti-Money Laundering and RIPA policies, and report on instances from September 2024 to August 2025. And I call on the Assistant Director for Legal and Governance, Bipinda Gill, to introduce the report, please.
Okay, change your mic. You'll see in paragraph 4.3 what's been happening over the last few years. So for the last couple of years, we've had no instances of any complaints raised under that policy, and it's there's a group of us that meet on a monthly basis, which includes Phil and I, to go through any matters that we may have received and to consider whether they fall within that policy and what action we should take as a result of that. In relation to the anti-bribery and money laundering policy, again, zero concerns were raised in this, and this is something that your head of internal audit and risk manages and liaised with him in the production of the report to do that. In relation to the regulation of investigatory powers, that is something that my team look after. And again, during the course of the last 12 months, zero requests were requested in order to carry out any covert surveillance that might be necessary under that policy. So that was all I was intending to say, Chairperson. If there's any questions, I'm more than happy to try and attend to those. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hackwell, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The first question, which is obviously, why do you think there hasn't been any speak-ups or whistleblowing or whatever for the last 2 years? I would like to understand. I mean, I remember when we reviewed that policy, we reviewed it in some detail, changed it to up instead of whistleblowing and things like that. And it just does concern me that, is it because the staff aren't comfortable with the process, or is it because, and it said one of the risks is they may not know what to do, and I find it, how is it promoted? How is it re-promoted all the time, so that it's there, and so it, be front and centre if someone decides that they've got a concern. It'd be easy to find. I don't know. I haven't searched the intranet to find it. Fine. Is it? If you didn't know what it was called, has it got like, how do I snitch on someone or something like that? I just don't know. I mean, what's your belief? I mean, because we had this in Employment Matters as well. We had this concern. No, nobody. And like 2022, there was 8, which was it's a dramatic drop, really. Can you just get some thoughts on why you think that's happening?
So it's going to be very difficult for me to answer in any kind of substantive and kind of give you a real insurance on that. on those questions. From time to time, with these types of policies, you do have blips, and all right, for the last 2 years, we've had no reports made, but as you can see in 22, 23, we had 8 reports and incidents that came through, and I remember at that point there was a query as to why are we having so many things going wrong. So you can't win whether there's a large number of these coming through or there's a small number coming through. In terms of understanding how easy it is to find the policy, I've just typed up Speak Up policy into our intranet site, and it's the first document that comes up straight away. So I'm relatively comfortable that it's an easy enough policy to find. Last week's corporate management team, and in fact service managers meeting we had this week, we had the results of the staff survey that was undertaken a couple of months ago, shared with senior officers, and the results across the whole of the survey are very promising. I'll leave it to others to brief members on that in due course. But one of the questions in there was about how comfortable individuals are about reporting concerns either to their managers or elsewhere within the organisation. And the results on that, I haven't got the data in front of me. Phil may be able to remember it. But from memory, the results were very promising in that the vast majority of staff knew how to make a concern and how to raise a concern and how to do that either to their line manager or elsewhere. There was a small core and a very small core of that, and I think when Sam presented the figures, he said it may well amount to maybe approximately about 100 or so across the whole workforce who weren't sure of how to do that and how to raise concerns. So one of the things we're going to be doing in response to that survey is responding to those concerns in that we're going to be making it much more easier for people to understand how to raise concerns and what the right process is for that. And at service managers this week, what I've also said to service managers is that I'm going to be introducing an annual governance questionnaire, and I'll mention that a little bit more detail in one of the reports later on, where managers will be required to complete a questionnaire every year, setting out what they have shared with their teams, what policies and procedures that they've done, so that we have a broader field upon which to gain assurance that everybody knows what the right processes are, what the right procedures are, and if they do have any concerns, how to raise them and how to do things in the proper way. I can see that our COO is willing to come in and support me on that, but I'll hand over to you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to that, avid watchers of the Medway 2.0 programme will be aware that we're looking at introducing an HR chatbot based around AI, so that it makes it easier for folk to interrogate our policies and find them. So even if you didn't know it was the Speak Up policy, AI, how do I report a concern? It should direct you to the right place.
Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder if a benchmarking against other unitaries might be useful here in order to give that extra level of assurance on that. I think it's interesting about the AI bots. HR's being AI'd all over the place, actually, but we've got to remember we've got a lot of staff who might not be at a computer for big parts of the day, and it's how do they communicate, especially those who might be involved in traffic warden type things. You do see some potential for corruption in those areas, so something to consider. I think we touched on this in last meeting around annual training for staff, you know, the mandatory stuff, and whether this could be slotted into the annual training, mandatory training that staff do, just to make sure everyone's aware of it.
Councillor Nestrop.
Not a question, thank you, Chair. Just a comment. I'm really happy to see that in table 4.3 that there is 0 reports for 2023 and 24, and it just seems like something fundamentally changed in the council that year. Thank you.
I've got a question. Independent member, did you have a question?
Thank you. I just have a question that it was mentioned that in a survey, staff were aware of this policy. How much, like, what could be the percentage of staff who are aware of this policy?
Through you, Chair. I mean, I won't go into the significant detail of the results of the staff survey because I'm the wrong person to ask, and I haven't had a chance to interrogate that detail. But there was a very good percentage turnout for the staff survey. It was I think it was a 55% return on that across the workforce, and of that, you know, the extrapolation was that it was an incredibly small number who said that they weren't aware of the policies. Now, I'm more than happy to go away and do some benchmarking across other organisations, but as you will be aware, that can give you some detail. It can give you some numbers for comparison, but it's very difficult in these areas to draw any conclusions on that, because as we know, some organisations have greater difficulties than others do for a whole host of reasons. But if it is any assurance that I can provide to you, that Phil, James, I and Sam meet on a monthly basis, not only to consider if there's any whistleblowing complaints that have come in, but we also look at the number of grievances that are being pursued across the organisation and employment tribunal matters as well. And if there's a correlation between all of those, I can say that all of those numbers are in the very low single digits, and therefore that, if that can be a source of assurance, that provides us with some degree of comfort that it isn't for the lack of knowledge that these matters are not being raised.
One additional point, are we looking at exit surveys as well, Bhupinder, as a further bit of data that might give some indication?
I don't look at exit surveys as part of this report, but I know that colleagues in HR do look at exit surveys.
Thank you, everybody. I've got a couple of questions, and they're about thresholds, really, because occasionally when we're examining something, it doesn't fall into the category because it fell into a different one. And I am assured that when you talk about grievances and various other issues that are discussed by yourselves as seniors, I'm wondering if some of the bribery and anti-money laundering stuff actually feeds into some different investigative regimes. Because believe me or believe me not, a lot of us as members are getting communications where people are making assumptions that, you know, the statements like brown envelopes are out and about. But of course, if that doesn't reach the threshold to be in the formal investigation of anti-bribery or anti-money laundering, I just wonder if you can share any light on the fact that if there is an accusation, false or otherwise, that there is a mechanism for investigation of that, and it may not reach the threshold of a formal inquiry under these policies?
So if a report comes through, what happens is an initial triaging process whereby that report is shared between myself, Phil, James and Sam. The three of us get together to review that complaint, and we have a discussion about the complaint as written down. We're not too bothered into, if I can put it that way, as to what category it might fall into, or whether it crosses any kind of notional threshold. What we look at is there a complaint here that needs to be looked into, and who would be the most appropriate person to look into that complaint, and then you know, where those complaints are passed on to James and his team, we receive a report back as to what those investigations have revealed. Now, it's fair to say that we've had a number of complaints, and James and his team have gone away and had a look at them. And when they've gone away and spoken to people who've lodged the complaint, on 9 times out of 10, they've said that it appears as though that they've got matters confused, if I can put it that way, and then it's not required any further investigation. So we're not looking at ways to exclude complaints or to rule them out, but rather we're looking at complaints and saying, is there something here that needs looking at, even if it's only the slightest or the smallest of concerns. Let's go away and satisfy ourselves that is there something that needs further detailed looking at, or can we be sure that everything is safe?
Thank you. I think the committee needed that kind of level of assurance, given zero results to the official report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just one more question. You mentioned the staff survey results. One memory of that staff survey was quite a lot of people that reported harassment or discrimination in the charts. How was that reported if it wasn't reported in the whistleblowing or speak up policy?
So there is the council has a number of policies in relation to concerns that its colleagues, workforce members may well have, and within those we have separate policies to raise complaints of grievance or harassment, and those are dealt with by the HR team, and they wouldn't fall under the speak up policy. So those are matters that are dealt with under those policies and dealt with, and there may well be separate details kept of those. But as I've said, the four of us get together on a monthly basis and review the detail that comes out from those. Quite usefully, Phil's just sent over a slide to me. There was a question in the staff survey which was, I feel comfortable to be myself at work without fear of discrimination, and the response rate to that was 82.4%. So an overwhelming percentage of colleagues feel comfortable at work and to be able to do that. A further 11% didn't know whether they agreed or did agree with it. Having worked in the public sector for majority of my career, and I think it's probably the same in most areas, is that if people are not happy with something, they are more likely to fill in a questionnaire and say that they are not happy. It's those that are relatively content with stuff that are perhaps a little bit more unlikely to respond to things, and those that were not strongly disagreed with the question was 5.8%. Now, yes, in percentages, that is a small number, but as I've indicated, when we've discussed this as a corporate management team, that is something that we're going to be following through, and we're going to be taking further action on that. And in terms of, do people know who to complain to if they were experiencing discrimination or harassment at work? Again, the response rates on that were 76.5% knew who to complain to. 1/5, 20.9 said that they didn't, but we're going to be picking that issue up to make sure that, in future surveys, that figure is reduced and people have a better idea of who to report things to. It may well be that they don't know where the form is and they're responding quite literally to the question, but if they go away and talk to the union reps or to colleagues, I'm sure that somebody would be able to point them in that direction. There's many policies out there that people might ask me, do you know where that policy is? I will know of its existence, but I might not necessarily be able to put my finger on it immediately. Thank you.
Any more questions? I go to Vice Chair, please.
Thank you, Chair.
We now move on to the annual governance statement for 24-25. And I ask the Assistant Director for Legal Governance, Bhupinder Gill, to take this forward for us too, please.
Thank you, Chairperson. Again, this is an annual report that I bring to this committee in terms of the production of the annual governance statement. For those of you who served on this committee for any extended period of time, you know that we follow a framework that's produced by CIPFA and Solis, and that framework has been in place for the best part of a decade now, and seeks assurance that we have a framework in place to ensure that there is good governance across the organisation. There is a set number of areas that we need to respond to and target in terms of how we're responding, and I've set those out in the appendix and gone through them in detail. There are 7 principles, and they're all set out there in detail. I won't go through them line by line now. I'm sure members may well be grateful that I don't do that. But I'm more than happy to try and answer questions on those. What I have referenced also, which is a slight change this year, is that in addition to just simply looking at the framework that was produced by CIPFA and Solis, what I've also done is looked at 2 other frameworks. One which was the CIPFA code, a financial management code, which was issued in 2019, and also there's a separate code for improvement and assurance framework for local government, which is just over a year ago. Now, unfortunately, all 3 codes are slightly different, but there's a significant degree of overlap in all 3 of them. And in producing the AGS, what I've tried to do is make sure that in one document I've covered off all 3 codes so that you don't have to have 3 separate reports coming to you. And without trying to tread on the toes of the report that immediately follows this, this one, there has been an addendum issued to the code that was issued back in 2016. And what I've also tried to do, whilst that code is not in force at the moment and will apply to the AGS for next year, I've also tried to pick up elements of that and pick those up in the AGS that you have before you. Finally, you'll notice that in the AGS, towards the end of it, there is a statement by James setting out what his view is in terms of the assurance framework. And I've provided a slightly longer narrative on that than I've done in previous years. And that's simply because James is only able to provide a limited assurance, but that limited assurance is based on not that there is any concerns that have appeared, but simply because of the volume of field work that he's been able to do in the year is more limited than he would have wanted to do so, and therefore he feels it's only right to only provide a limited assurance. Happy to answer any questions through you, Chair.
Thank you. Just as a point of information for the committee, the chairs of audit South East met online day before yesterday, and CIPFA gave us a presentation about the future, the frameworks that are currently in use, and pointed out those slight differences. And I thank you for covering all the frameworks, because some of them are slightly different, but there is an amount of continuity. And the presentation also covered the dates in which stuff is coming in with the new framework and the addendum. And the good thing is, Medway are now ahead of the curve on that, because a lot of people who attended that meeting, it was the first time they heard anything about that, whereas it hasn't been for us. Thank you. Questions? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you. I was just wondering, was he supposed to have had a question? Chair, thank you for the report. I mean, as a reasonably new councillor, I recognise the things that are set out here actually happen. I might not be involved in them, regrettably, but you do see it happening. Can I just take core principle F on page 40 as far as I possibly can in terms of the council's current financial picture and whether the running of deficits and the borrowing of money to cover deficits does meet that principle fully. I recognise the work that's being done and that's set out in that principle, but is there a danger that the continuing running of deficits puts us at risk of breaching that particular principle? Thank you, Chair.
Without wishing to sidestep that question, I think my senior colleague may well be better placed to respond to that, but I have full confidence in Chief Operating Officer and his finance team to safeguard the council and also to respond to that question more detailed now.
Thank you, Chair. I think that the exceptional financial support that's been put on offer for local authorities in the position that we're in is a way forward, but I think you've got to have a plan to exit it. So as long as it and that's the aim for the council and for myself to develop and formulate a medium-term financial plan to get us out of this position over the next few years. Now, the MTFO or MTFP projections that accompanied the budget in February, in fact, if you go back the February before that, it plotted out a kind of plan for 3 years worth of EFS. Now, the government wouldn't award us 3 years worth of EFS, but that was our medium-term plan, was to exit that kind of situation within 3 years. Our current aspiration in setting the budget for 26-27 is to set a budget without recourse to EFS. You will know, because you've seen the MTFO that went to Cabinet in September, that's going to be very challenging, but that still remains our aspiration. And actually this week we've had a really good round of budget meetings with all 3 directorates that have made massive inroads into that. And I'm confident we can get to a balanced budget. Whether it is fully without EFS, I'm not going to guarantee it at this stage. But yes, in the context of your question, I think EFS is a tool to manage the budget challenges over the medium term. We're using it, but you've got to have a plan to exit it.
Chair, just to come back, thanks, Phil. I don't underestimate the challenge, the financial challenge that the council faces. But the cabinet papers I saw doesn't seem to have an end game. In actual fact, we're 18 million for the current financial year, going up to 60 million potentially in 2 or 3 years' time. So at the moment, where I'm sitting as an opposition councillor, only party to some of the discussions, that actually I don't see an exit at the moment. And that's therefore my challenge on principle F, that we're not in a position to fully meet that because we don't have an exit plan. And I think the administration is waiting for the government to throw them a bloody big lifebuoy in order to get them out. And I don't think it's coming. There's also one other sort of principle that I've expressed in other meetings, is that because we're going into LGR, we're going to be saddling potentially Dartford, Gresham and Swale with our EFS deficit. And I wonder once again whether that is in the spirit of Principle F that we're doing that. Thank you.
Okay. So it's always been thus, and this is why we changed the name of what we used to refer to as the medium-term financial plan to the medium-term financial outlook, because at the point at the point we were writing it, we hadn't got a plan, yeah, you know, for a balanced budget. That's the process that takes place between September, November, then with overview and scrutiny up to February, is identifying that plan to achieve a balanced budget. Now, I'm also conscious that when we managed, even when we managed to get a balanced budget, that doesn't necessarily mean we've got a balanced medium term. Part of the issue there is that we don't have multi-year settlements, so we don't know what the financial envelope's going to look like beyond the year ahead. But what I'm saying to you is that there's work being undertaken at the moment to achieve at least a balanced budget for 26-27 without recourse to EFS when we come to Cabinet and Council in February.
Chair, just sorry, Gary. Thank you for that answer, but can I just go back to the Assistant Director? In terms of a legal opinion, that's operational, but in terms of what we're doing as a council, are you comfortable that... Sorry? No, no, this is the annual statement.
So, through you, Chair, I was just going to make the point that the annual governance statement up to now is always reporting on the financial year that has ended, rather than one we're in, and looking forward. Now, with the addendum, which is the next report, one of the changes that they've made in that is that from next year onwards, the AGS statement will not only be looking backwards, but they also want you to be looking to see how you're managing your risks moving forward. So whilst I can't give you that assurance now, it gives you the assurance that next year's will be more detailed and looking and telling you what the authority's plans are to try to manage that. Now, in terms of the finances, yeah, it'd be wrong of me to try to explain that. You are both feeling yourself far more experienced in those matters than I am. But yeah, from a legal perspective, what the authority has to do is when it sets a budget in circa February each year, it has to set a budget that balances, and that is the legal requirement. And I think the language in the legislation, it's not something that I read regularly, but it talks about estimates as to what you need. So it's not saying that this is a fixed number and you have to deliver it. You're estimating what the cost of delivery of your plans is. And we can sit here forever and a day arguing about the interpretation of the word of an estimate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back on the EFS, though, because it does concern me, is there any trigger points? I mean, I think in the medium term outlook, you said cumulatively it's going to get up to 191 million, which is probably more than the council tax that we take in a year. So is there any mechanism to sort of say, well, you know, we can't go past 50% of the council tax income, or we just keep borrowing it forever and just say, well, just keep going? I mean, what is the trigger where you say, oh, it's time for me to file a 141 report or whatever it's called?
I don't know what the trigger is. I mean, going back to Bhupinder's point about setting a legal budget, some people might argue that the fact that I've had to borrow 18 million or whatever it is to balance the budget, but the fact is you balance the budget with the funds that are made available to you. Some of that's grant, some of that's council tax, some of that's business rates, and the government, rightly or wrongly, has said a capitalisation direction is also a tool available to us to balance the budget. So in that context, we've set a balanced budget. You might not agree with why we've done it, but in terms of your question around a trigger point at which it ceases to be sustainable, I mean, there are some local authorities out there that have been given capitalisation directions running into hundreds of millions of pounds. Now, well, ours isn't. No, if we get, like I say, if we did nothing, if we took no action, yes, that's what the outlook suggests will happen. That what that's doing is articulating the pressures that we're confronted with. If we do nothing, demographic pressures, predicted inflationary pressures. But obviously, the process of setting the budget is to identify measures to manage within the resources that we've got available to us. So, you know, by the time we get to February, if we haven't set a balanced budget by then well, that's an option open to us, but that's a conversation we'll have at that point. But at the moment, we're aiming to set a balanced budget without recourse to EFS by February.
Any other questions? Independent member, thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Page 45, last paragraph. Why after achieving 88% of the actions, the opinion is limited assurance? What is the main reason here?
James, I think that's to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So yeah, this is in year 88% of actions that have reached their due date have been completed. That only forms part of what is only part of what goes into assessing what assurance opinion I can deliver. So the number of actions, as you can see there were 81 of 92 were completed. So there's only 9 outstanding, which isn't too bad really, considering the volume. So it only forms a very small part of the opinion. It's not based purely on those actions. Obviously, it's the other field work that we complete as part of our internal audit plan throughout the year as well. So it is considered, but it's not the sole factor that leads to the limited assurance.
Councillor Nesterov.
Thank you, Chair. Can I pick up on this as well? It's very positive that we have 88% completed actions. I also noticed the page before that there are 4 reviews that receive red opinion. Could you clarify which of these reviews? What do they relate to? The red ones.
Yeah, they'll all be in my annual report. That'll all be in my annual report. Obviously, which includes my annual opinion, but the annual opinion also feeds into the AGS as well, which is why it's on this item.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Thank you. Vice Chair, please.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation on page 21. The committee is recommended to comment and approve the annual government statement. The committee is recommended to delegate authority to Assistant Director of Legal and Governance in conclusion with the chairperson of the Audit Committee to make minor changes to the document prior to signing by the leader of the Council. Is that agreed?
Agreed. Thank you. Now we move to item 7, delivering good governance in local government. And it's again the Assistant Director of Legal and Governance, please.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think all of us around the tables have made reference to this document in one form or another in the existing reports, but suffices to say, as I've said, the existing framework's been around since 2016, and an addendum has now been issued, and that will apply to AGS's produced for next year onwards. And as I've indicated, there's some changes. I wouldn't say that they're particularly significant. I view them as quite minor, and where we can incorporate those, I've already done. But the biggest changes, as far as I can see, is it's not just looking retrospectively at the year behind us, but also then starting to look forward and trying to manage the risks as we already are within the organisation, but perhaps some are not doing it as well as we are. And without wishing to tempt fate here, but yeah, we will pick those up. And as part of that process, what I will also be doing is in the forthcoming months, reviewing our local code of governance, which is in the Constitution, revising that so that it meets the new framework that we've got, and I'll bring that as a separate report back to this audit committee for detailed consideration before making a recommendation to full council for its adoption into the constitution. Happy to answer any questions through you, Chair.
Thank you for offering to do that. Save me a question. Thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
Chair, thank you. I have to say I was a bit confused reading those two reports, going, why is this report? Anyway, it was it. Yeah. Do you just? This is probably a slight tangent, Chair, so please forgive me. But are we happy that the councillors' code of conduct, because that councillors are obviously a key part of governance, is up to scratch and meets the needs of the council? Bhupinder, thank you.
I'm going to give you two answers. not in the alternative form as a lawyer, but I'll give you two answers. And so, do we meet what we need to do under the legislation and the framework that governs that? So we are legally compliant with what we need to have as a minimum, and we meet all the requirements. Am I personally happy as a monitoring officer with the code of conduct that we have? No, I am not. I think it needs to be strengthened, and I think it needs to be stronger. Am I going to do something about it immediately? No, I'm not, which is anticipating a question that you may raise. And the reason why I say that is that just prior to Christmas, the government issued a consultation document on revising the code of conduct for elected members. We filed a response to that, as did a number of authorities, and the government have said that they will be bringing in legislation to change the code of conduct, to strengthen the code of conduct, and bring back powers that were previously available but were done away in 2011. And specifically, they're looking to bring back stronger sanctions that will include the powers of suspension and powers of disqualification as well, and potentially bringing in an independent adjudication body, but they haven't said who that would be, to determine those matters. So it's a matter of waiting to see what government are going to suggest that we need to do or mandate what we need to do. So rather than having two bites at it, I'm just waiting for that. And I'm hopeful that when the King's speech is made, that it will be contained within the legislation that they're going to be undertaken in this parliamentary year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions? As Vice Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation at page 47. The committee is recommended to note the addendum to the framework. The committee is recommended to request the Assistant Director for Legal and Governance to review the existing processes and revise where necessary for production of the AGS. The committee is recommended to request the Assistant Director for Legal and Governance to review the local code of governance and recommend revisions. Is that agreed?
Agreed. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, that concludes my reports. May I be excused for the remainder of the meeting and wish you all the best.
We now move on to item 8, the updated audit plan for the year ending March 2025. And I'll ask the Head of Corporate Accounts, Andy McNally Johnson, to introduce the report for us, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report really just provides two things. It's an update to the 2024 audit plan, and it also gives an update on the current position on the audit of 2024-25. And my colleagues from Grant Thornton, Matt Dean, Nibbegan Osei are here to answer any questions you may have from the Grant Thornton side, and I'm happy to take any questions from our side. Thank you.
Welcome to our external auditors representatives, and thank you for introducing the report, Andy. I've got Councillor Bowen, I think, indicating.
Can you provide an explanation of the difficulties faced, which explain why it's unlikely the audit will be completed by the end of this month? And can you explain how you'll ensure we can provide Grant Thornton with the assurance they require before the statutory deadline of February 26?
Yes, thank you. So, first of all, the difficulties we have faced, I would say that what we found during the audit is, and it's partly due to previous audits not receiving an opinion, it does mean that that auditors have to select large samples, and those have been very time consuming for the teams, not just within finance but across the authority, to gain the appropriate evidence that Grant Thornton require in order to gain assurance. So there's two bits to this from my opinion. We've got the opening balances, and that is something that will have to be dealt with at a later date. And then we've got the audit of 2024-25, and therefore the audit of all the transactions that have gone through the authority. So Grant Thornton will pick various samples, and for example, just to give you an idea, within our comprehensive income and expenditure statement, we have had to deal with 237 separate samples. And each of those we have to find detailed evidence right back to third parties. So there's a huge raft of information that Grant Thornton have to go through, but we have to get to deal with that. I would say that whilst we have done our best to plan for this audit, I would say that we have realised that there is more we need to do in the future to be able to provide the detailed evidence down to the level that Grant Thornton require. So we've been working carefully with Grant Thornton to make sure that we can work through that in future. And that takes me on to the second part of your question. No, I'll go back to the first. The statutory deadline for an opinion on these accounts is the 27th of February 2026. So what I see happening is Grant Thornton will end up giving a disclaimer opinion purely for the opening balances. But from my point of view, I expect them to feel confident with the 2024-25 transactions and how they've audited that part before we go to that statutory deadline. So that's the plan. How it's going to work, from my point of view, is that any outstanding items as at the end of September, and I'm sure my colleagues from Grant Thornton explain why it ends in September, that will be left with us for us to deal with and provide them, so that I think the plan will be that they come back in early January, and at that point everything will be ready for them. So I hope this can be wrapped up as quickly as possible early in the next calendar year. So I'm confident we will do that, and I would say I feel that whilst the report that you see on the progress is as at the end of August, I believe that whilst there's more to do, we've made quite important steps forward during the last couple of weeks. With regards to the future, have you asked that? If you ask me about the future audits, I'm very sorry. So with regards to how we move forward with this and how we move forward to actually get a clean audit opinion, we've got a very clear pathway as my colleagues in finance, and we're going to work with the authority over the coming months to make sure that as we move towards the 25/6 audit, we're not in the same position as we are this year. So it will be a mixture of education, training across the authority, and working with our colleagues in other directorates to make sure that we can get hold of the information that Grant Thornton require more easily, more quickly, because it's a huge amount of work that Grant Thornton have to go through in a very short time, and therefore finance and the services. So we need to make sure we're prepared properly, and I'll be working with Phil, with the other directorates, to make sure that we move forward with that. And so I've explained it'll be through training and education across the authority, and we've already spoken to Grant Thornton about how they can help us to pull together information which will help both parties going forward. Hopefully that answers.
Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair. And in a similar vein, really, I was quite astonished to read that we've only completed 30% of the planned activity up until the end of August, and the report goes on to, I don't want to use the word blame, but the report goes on to say it was due to unforeseen absences in Medway Council's fault, so not Grant Thornton's problem, but Medway Council's problem. How are we going to address that problem doesn't happen again? Because people will go off sick, it will be unforeseen, and if we can't provide that, I mean, how do we put a plan in place to put temporary labour in, or hire, extra people so that we can actually provide Grant Thornton with the information they require? Because our auditors, 30% of planned work is not good enough, in my opinion.
I think we'll come to Phil to answer that one, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you can't predict that kind of thing. I mean, that has clearly been an issue, definitely this year, perhaps more than most years. We've had some really significant issues with staff absence. But what Andy was alluding to earlier in terms of us being better at this, better prepared for this, is that when the auditors are giving us the samples that they want to look at, during the close down process, we might take bulk journals for debtors and creditors and what have you, and there's a reliance that the evidence is there within the directorate because the directors are signing those off. But then the auditor will select that journal and say, I want the evidence. Then we've got to scrabble around and get it, and we've not been very well supported, have we, by the wider organisation. Now, what that's saying to me is we get it up front. Yeah, I know. I know it sounds patently obvious. It sounds patently obvious, but I don't want to be in this place again. And Andy and I have spoken with the rest of the finance function. Next time, every transaction that goes through at year end, we're going to have the evidence in a folder ready to go, so that when the auditor gives us their list of samples, it's there.
Thank you, Chair. I know you're looking at me. That's good enough. Andy, I don't want to labour the point, but expressing disappointment, but also, at the last audit committee, we did talk about getting those opening balances reconciled. If we've got this problem without the weight of that piece of work, we're going to need a lot more assurance. I'm just wondering if this is also, are our systems up to this? Because, most modern accounting systems, you have to attach every bit of paper to a transaction. So the auditors sit there and go and do it for themselves, literally. So I'm just wondering if there's a problem. And, a bit more, I think the Audit Committee should be given a bit more information about the sickness issue. Because it goes back to Principle F, doesn't it? I mean, we've spent 20 minutes talking about principle F in the audit governance statement, and yet we're now hearing that we can't provide, or we're finding it difficult to provide information to the auditors. So I'm not quite sure where you go with it. It's a bit of a nightmare.
Thank you, Chair. To be honest, some of my questions have been answered, but still I'm going to ask them. First of all, on page 77, auditors speak about materiality for items above 9 million for the council. Does that mean that you're going to be looking at items only above that number? Can you explain a bit more about it?
Sure, through you, Chair. So a materiality threshold is what we use to, I guess, ensure that the accounts are true and fair, but we don't necessarily look at just items above 9 million. We have a performance materiality as well, which is almost like a safe threshold, and we have a trivial threshold as well, which is within the report. I think we have is 450K. So we look at a range of figures, not just the 9 million within the accounts.
My point about that is, how do we make sure that small item, let's say below 450,000, are not missed, and this could lead to damage with the public trust?
So at the end of the audit, we accumulate all the errors or misstatements that we find, and we assess them and ensure that they're not above our threshold of reporting. So that's the way. We can't guarantee every pound will be, we're not here to guarantee everything 100% accurate. We're here to give a reflection of true and fair opinion on the account. So we will not be necessarily able to say that everything below 450 is fine and is true, but we can give an estimate and say, yes, anything above, a 9 million threshold is true and fair.
Okay, I'm just worried not to get a lot of small items and then to get a big discrepancy at the end.
We do assess all our small findings to ensure that they haven't accumulated above our threshold, definitely.
My second question is about the assumptions that you use to value our properties. As you know, the property market goes up and down quite quickly, mostly up. So how do you know that the assessment that was done months or years ago is actually accurate for now?
So not only do we engage, so through you, Chair, not only do we engage with your experts, which the council has its own external valuers, we also have our own valuers who also look at the reports, examine it, and ask questions. So we have those conversations with your valuers about the assumptions that they've used. Unfortunately, this year we haven't started that process, which is one of the things we report on the progress report due to unforeseen absences, but that is the procedures we tend to follow. We do involve experts in the discussions around valuation of properties.
Finally, I'm not sure if Andy answered that, but how can we ensure that we're going to get a clean audit opinion? Option, sorry.
I think from our point, as I said, whilst we're going to work in the next few months, obviously to make sure that we're in that position moving forward, we are learning from it. I'd like to say this is a journey that we're on as a team. And I know in speaking to Grant Thornton, I'm not going to speak for them, but although things in this report aren't where we want to be, I think even Grant Thornton have said their progress has been made, but we've got to get better. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to do that through training and education and planning, and that's those three key strands that we're going to do. I think, as Phil said, we don't know what's going to happen with things, and I would say with my own technical team, the team that are responsible for getting the statements put together, because it is a small team, and that is that's replicated across the authority, there is some specialisms in there that individuals have. We are in that position, so if we do have absences, of people with those specialisms, unfortunately, will have an impact on us. I'd love to say that everyone in my team can pick up absolutely everything. It's a small team, and unfortunately, these things happen. Hopefully, they don't happen again. But, you know, you just hope people are well and you're able to get through things okay.
Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a couple of actual other questions. Andy, just the paragraph 5 on the financial implications. There's some outstanding fees to be calculated. I'm assuming they're not material. So it's page 74 of the report. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, sorry. So the way the fees, we obviously have PSAA agreed scale fees, and they are paid throughout the year that the audit takes place. But there are other fees, normally for certification, certain grants and things like that. It mentions their teachers' pension, housing subsidy, pool of capital receipts. And they tend to obviously take place afterwards, and we don't always have the fees. We've got an idea of what they were before. They're not, what I'd say, as you can see with the scale fees, they're not significant as those. We've budgeted for a certain level, and I wouldn't expect them to change significantly over that that's already been budgeted.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy, for that. I had one final question. I just noticed on page 99 of the report, it talks about, effectively, there are 3 auditors involved in, there's Grant Thornton working on the councils, then we've got the LATCOs, they've got different auditors. And I just sort of remember a comment about it's taken a long time to get information through from the LATCOs that was holding up the overall consolidation. And I'm just wondering, do we have 3 auditors because that's good governance, or do we have 3 auditors because the other 2 might be a bit cheaper than our friends at Grant Thornton? But would it make more sense to have 1 auditor doing the whole job? Thank you, Chair.
Can I ask Phil to answer that? I think it's a technical question.
So the reason they've got different auditors is because they are companies and they can make those decisions themselves. I mean, I would yeah, and that's true. But on the recommendation of the board. But I would be interested in Matt's view as to what happens in other local authorities actually. But I mean that's the reason why we've got them. There were issues last time, weren't there, in terms of I know, for example, MDC, their accounts, they submitted them to us on time, but when I looked at them, I wasn't happy. So I sent them back, and they got their accountants and auditors to do them again, and that created a delay in terms of us getting our group accounts ready. Andy will probably be able to update us where we are now with the companies, and then if Matt could come in on the.
Yes, thank you. So where we are right now, we did have an issue with one of our LATCOs where we didn't have all the information. My understanding, talking to one of my accountants, is we have that information now, and we're in the process of finalising that so that the group accounts are of a standard we'd want them to be. So that works happening right now, and as soon as we've got that, we'll make that available to Grant Thornton. But it is difficult. We do work closely. We have regular meetings with our subsidiaries, and I do believe things are better this year than last year, and I believe they'll improve further as we go forward.
I mean, so in terms of having different auditors, that's not massively unusual with local authority subsidiaries. Certainly, there was a spell probably 5 years ago where we as a firm probably did quite a bit of the work with subsidiaries, not perhaps here, but certainly other authorities. It does provide challenges in the sense that as a firm, we have set charge-out rates, etc., etc. So, to be honest, you as an authority will get a better value for money having a smaller firm looking at it, because they'll be able to spend more time, more effort looking at those things than we would do for the same fee. So certainly as a firm, we did make a decision about 5 years ago to step back from some of the subsidiaries we audited, because it just allowed those subsidiaries and then the authorities to get a better service, I'm being honest, than we could do, to be honest. So, yeah, it's reasonably common to have that approach. I don't think having separate ones is a problem. I think as long as you as the authority are managing that process, that's the most important thing. As long as those auditors eventually give those companies an opinion, which I suspect in most cases is going to be unqualified at some point, obviously they'll have the 9-month window, that gives you as an authority all you need, ultimately, because at some point you then just date and go, right, that's the audited numbers, put those in. Or if they're not materially different, you go with what the drafts say. So in a way, it kind of is a sort of a discrete piece of work that gives you assurance over those. You will get positive opinions, I'm sure, on those two companies, and that gives the, I guess, assurance that those elements of the overall group are fine. You know, I guess as and when we get to the point where we get closer to giving a proper opinion, we will start to get stuck into those probably more than we would do currently, because obviously, you know, it's benefit. You know, if we're not going to get to an unqualified opinion, then there's a cost-benefit analysis on those. But obviously, we would then look to liaise with those auditors and place as much reliance on that work as we could, ultimately, to avoid duplication, etc. You know, in an ideal world, we will come and have a look at their files, look at the work in perhaps the key areas of focus that are there in the plan, and that would be that. And ideally, we can rely on that and go, yes, you know, unqualified opinion on that. That gives us the assurance we need. So, in a way, it's not a bad thing, because it allows, you know, different people to look at those things. You know, less single point of failure, I suppose. That's for you. That's 3 get 2. That's for the shareholders to decide, as you said earlier, ultimately, I suppose. But yeah.
I've got a couple of questions, and they're primarily for Ibby and for Matt. We understand that there's going to be a qualified audit for the period that we're looking at. Disclaim, sorry. Yeah, I beg your pardon. So, I have so much to learn. Anyway, a disclaimed audit opinion. But I was just going to go back, and I do sound a bit like a broken record on that, notwithstanding the last week. But has there been any clarity coming from government about how we get past the impasse that was the previous position we were in?
So that's quite tiny. That was one thing I did want to jump in on. And myself, Paul, and Ibby had a chat with Phil just a week or so ago, so Phil knows this. So as I understand, there is at last an agreement, or there's a work programme, as I understand, that's been agreed between the firms, the NAO, the FRC, ICAW, around the regaining assurance piece, which will allow us as auditors to take a risk-based approach to getting assurance over those balances. So I think the example sort of Paul shared when we talked it through last was, for example, are there significant risks around the valuation of schools, for example? Probably not, in reality. And that would then allow us to take a far more streamlined approach in that area to perhaps some of the other areas of that kind of balance where there might be more risk, for example. So, I mean, I've not seen the detail of that. I know that our technical team have been involved in those conversations. They're positive in terms of what that looks like. I mean, it's probably, you know, the aim will be things we've said in the past around focusing on things like debtors, creditors, and those kind of things. So ultimately, it should allow us to take a risk-based approach, which should give us a greater chance of getting that, regaining that assurance, as it was and perhaps was the case beforehand, where we were in that view that we've got to look at every balance. So I've not personally seen it, but you know, I have assurance speaking to someone like Paul, who's been involved in those conversations, that it feels a positive step in the right direction. So that's good. And obviously, I think, you know, just to touch a little bit on the report, I mean, I think as Andy said, I think, you know, whilst there are delays, I think we are further ahead than we were at this point last year, and it is important to reflect that. You know, I think we'd like to be further ahead, but we are ahead. And I think, you know, we've all agreed there's a sensible plan in place between us and the council to take stock again at the end of September and make sure we are you know, we can do as much as we can in that January, February period to come back and give you that assurance, certainly over that in-year position that Andy said. So, you know, there's clear commitment from all sides in terms of getting that position, you know, so there's a push for us to make sure we get as much done as we can by the end of September, when we'll roll off to the phase 2 jobs, which don't start till October, hence the split. But yeah, we're still on that track, and you know, we're all moving in the right direction on that. So yeah, I think it's smaller steps than I guess we would hope, but I would say there is some positive movement, as Andy said as well.
Thanks for that, Matt. Good to have some good news coming in from the external. My other question is, and it kind of goes back to, I think we're working towards the next audit, and I just wanted to confirm my understanding. You're asking for bigger samples this time around to help with the assurance levels. And do you feel that if you get that this year, it will help you, notwithstanding that we still need to give you whatever you ask for and to the level, but will it give you assurance that, if you like, the foundations are reasonably in place to go to the clean audits going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sample sizes, I mean, Andy's right to touch on those. They are, you know, a combination, you know, ultimately, I guess, an outcome of where things have got to. Ultimately, if we could get to a point where, say, by towards the end of February, we're in a position to go, yes, we're going to issue a disclaimer, but we've got assurance over pretty much all of those I&E balances, then when we, effectively, one of the main drivers is materiality, effectively, then when we have the conversation for next year's planning, we can go, actually, we've got a bit more assurance over those balances. There's less unknown for us as auditors, so we can actually then potentially push, because it's based on the percentages there in the plan. We might be able to say, right, we can put that percentage up by 0.1%, 0.2%. That increase, I can't say specifically quite how much, but that obviously will knock the sample size down, in theory. So it's, you know, it's a formula behind it. But actually, so if we were to put material out by 0.2%, you might knock 50 samples off, for example. Obviously, if the balance was the same, for example, so things might move. So yeah, so actually, in theory, I'd like to hope in years to come, those sample sizes will come down. You know, they're at the very high end of what we do, and to us, none of us particularly enjoy bashing through 230 income and expenditure items, but I guess it's a system of where we are. But actually, if we can start to make those steps, then I would hope we can bring those samples down in years to come. And obviously, it does give that assurance as well. But I guess it's one of those things, if you're testing 230 items, you're far more likely to hit the one that you perhaps haven't quite done what you should have done than if you were testing 50. Example, you know, that's, I guess, the luck of the draw. But, yeah.
Thank you. Have any other questions? No, the Vice Chair, please.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation on page 71. The committee is recommended to note the updated audit plan for 2024-25, including the core fees and those proposed for the audit services. Is that agreed? Agreed.
Sorry. Now we move on to item 9. It's the internal audit annual report. I'll ask James to introduce that for us, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the internal audit annual report, which can be found at Appendix 1, outlines the performance of the team against the agreed work plans for 2024-25 and brings together the information provided in the 3 updates presented to the committee during the year, along with additional information relating to work completed since the last update. Section 3, starting on page 130, details the resource available to the team during the year. Now, the original plans were based upon projected resources at the start of the year, which took into account working days of all staff, less annual leave, allowances for training, administration, etc. Now, that projection forecast that 685 days would be available for internal audit work. As noted in our updates throughout the year, we experienced some significant resourcing issues, and only 510.9 days of chargeable activity was actually undertaken, 98% of which related to internal audit assurance activity, and the remaining 2% was on consultancy activity. Now, as the Council's Chief Audit Executive, I am required to deliver an opinion on the adequacy of the Council's governance arrangements, framework of risk management and system of internal control. Now, the AD for Legal and Governance has kind of stolen my thunder because he had the AGS first, so you've already know about a lot of it. Now, the basis for the opinion is formed in part by the internal audit assurance work undertaken throughout the year, but also considers other forms of assurance, including external inspections, and the consultancy and advice work we carry out as well, which all feeds into the process for delivering the AGS that we've talked about already. Now, these factors are detailed in section 4, starting on page 131, and I have reflected that where we have identified weaknesses, the actions for improvement have been accepted by management with a commitment for them to be implemented. Now, as we've already discussed, I have given a limited assurance opinion this year, but that is largely due to the much lower volume of work that we've been able to complete because of those resourcing issues. However, the fact that 4 of the 14 reviews finalised resulted in red opinions, which basically mean we can't provide assurance that internal controls are working effectively, was a contributing factor to this decision as well. Picking up on the earlier question, the 4 that resulted in red opinions related to corporate health and safety, adult social care debt recovery, private housing enforcement, and one of our maintained schools. Section 5, which is on page 133, provides the real detail of the work undertaken throughout the year. As you'll see in the initial bullet points, the agreed plans were amended during the year to take account in changes to the available resource. The committee approved most of these changes in year, but there was a need for an urgent amendment after the March committee meeting that could not wait until July. The tables in this section, which are from page 134 onwards, show the results of each planned assurance review for members' consideration and the current position for any reviews that are yet to have reports finalised with clients. You will note that the outturn for planned delivery as of 31st of March was 63% against a target of 95%. I accept totally this is not good enough, but is again reflective of our resourcing issues in year. This is followed by 3 tables commencing on page 146 that detail the responsive or alternative assurance work and consultancy work undertaken during the year. The team had 13 performance measures for 24-25, which are detailed in a quality assurance and improvement programme that was agreed for that year. Those performance measures are listed in the table at section 6, starting on page 150. Some key things to point out. IA7 shows the proportion of our estimated resources delivered as 76%. Now, this takes into account work connected with the 16% of reviews still underway as of 31st of March, as well as the 63% of the plan delivered. Measures 11 and 12 relate to actions agreed through the course of audit reviews, and you'll see that 88.2% were implemented during the year, which is 81 of 92 actions. Finally, the details of actions agreed and those completed can all be found in the table at section 7, commencing on page 152. I'm happy to take any questions that members may have.
Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, James, for the report. Just a quick question on risk management. I was a bit disturbed by the paragraph on risk management in there that said that, of the 15 things that were scheduled for audit, you couldn't find a risk register in 9 of them, and of the remaining 6, only 3 could have evidence to show you. So how are we? What are we doing about risk registers and ensuring that happening in business? Because I mean, it is a process that we go through at senior management level, and it's all meant to filter down, but it doesn't seem as though it's filtering down. Yeah, go on.
So we've recognised this is a bit of a weakness. So we've got a strategic risk register. All directorates are supposed to have risk registers. Projects are meant to have risk registers. This year we've established a risk management group, corporate risk management group, and Paul Boyd and his team have set up a kind of repository through SharePoint for all the risk registers to be uploaded into the repository and linked through, so that there's a thread all the way through from project risks right up to strategic risks. And through the regular meetings of the newly constituted risk management group, it's an officer level group, we will make recommendations to CMT about escalation and de-escalation of risks up and down through that hierarchy. So we are definitely trying to get on top of it now. But the first step is to ensure that actually robust registers exist in all of the places where they need to.
Councillor Nestrov.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, James, for clarifying which are the red areas. Now I see how it works. I have some questions about that as well. First question is about virtual school checks. It says that only 61% of personal education plans, PEPs, for children in care were finished last summer. What steps are being taken to raise that percentage?
That's really a question for the service rather than myself. But I know they have been. This is dealt with by different. So the virtual school team aren't the people that complete these assessments. The assessments are completed by the social workers, so it's a completely separate team. They are trying to work with them to get. I know they're trying to work with them to get the numbers increased, but I would imagine that there's a number of factors that impact on that. We all know that social care staffing levels continue to fluctuate, so that there may be some impact from that. For more detail about what they're doing, I'm afraid that would have to be the service that would advise on that.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is about the rate areas, the 4 rate areas that we're talking about. What actions are we taking to make sure that it's better next time, in the next report?
Yeah, so obviously we agree actions with the service, and these are actions that they've got to undertake to look at improvements in their risk management and their internal control. So that will form part of our follow-up process, as all other actions do, regardless of the result of the opinion that results in the review. So you will see activity on those as they become due. We'll obviously report back to this committee on whether they've been implemented, whether they're outstanding, etc. So those will continue to be in our usual update reports. But obviously the services have agreed actions to address the weaknesses that we've identified.
Yeah, for example, the housing enforcement, they flag 134,500 of possible loss of income. So how is our action gonna help them to recover that and to be better next time?
Yeah, as I say, it's the service themselves that have to deal with the actions. So for that particular one, obviously they've got to look at the actions that agreed relate to reviewing and updating relevant policies and procedures, incorporating realistic timescales, ensuring fees within the policy and template documents are updated annually, pursuing cases in a timely manner after tenant vacation, because there are some problems there, reviewing authorisation procedures, historic notices, cases where no final notice has been served, and obviously serving final notices in a timely manner. So it's some of those processes that aren't happening quick enough that are impacting on their ability to recover it. So the actions we've been talking about are aimed at improving the turnaround of those things that will then hopefully enhance the income that's coming in.
Maybe more staff or?
Potentially, but again, that's a matter for the service.
For them, okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Before we go to this, Councillor Lawrence, can I ask the committee if they would like us to make a recommendation that we remind officers in the services of the results of those internal audits with a view to helping them, especially in CY, children and housing, so that we can ask officers to just bring those to the fore. Would the committee welcome that kind of little push, but helpful push?
Well, Chair, if it's helpful, I'm just wondering what role the portfolio holders play in this, because obviously these internal reports are I imagine are being presented to portfolio holders. So just picking up Councillor Nesterov's concern about what's going on in housing, my question would be, is Councillor Prenter aware? Is she asking the right questions of officers, but also what's going on at CMT in terms of governance around some of this stuff? So that would be my personal, approach.
If I may, Chair, yeah, the final report, when reviews are finalised, the portfolio holders are included in the distribution of the final report, so portfolio holders do get to see the results of the audit reviews. In terms of the actions, obviously, as I say, we've got the follow-up process that we report to yourselves. Those we report on a quarterly basis to all the directorate management teams, so that directors are aware of what actions are outstanding, so that they can speak to their service managers and see what, basically ask questions if things are behind. Obviously, when the reports are finalised, we agree expected dates. Now, obviously, this is at a point in time and they're saying, right, this is a date we think we can do it by, but things, things change. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. So some do obviously fail to meet those target implementation dates. But that's what the follow-up process is about, and the escalation process within that, so that if things are dragging on, it goes through their directorate management team first. CMT get an annual report on that as well. And obviously it comes to this committee for scrutiny as well. So there is an escalation process for all of those. And we specifically flag, as you'll see in the next update report, anything that's more than 6 months overdue.
Chair, thank you. Before I move on to my questions, we can ask Councillor Prenter next time she comes to Regen what she's done about these particular items. So you can ask that question. Just in terms of the actual report, thank you for the report. It sort of brings everything together, doesn't it, over the last year. I do recall discussing resourcing last time we had your report. It's almost a bit of a deja vu moment, actually. Can I just ask a question first, and then I'll follow it up? Is what percentage of your resourcing issue is sickness, and what percentage is vacancy?
During last year, it was a mixture of both. So one of our internal auditors did leave partway through the year. We covered that with a secondment from our counter fraud team. We also had someone who ended up being off with a back injury. Towards the end of the year, we also had a retirement. So again, that contributes to the vacancy part of it. So it was a bit of a mixture throughout the year. Unfortunately, that long-term absence did result in the person taking medical retirement because it was an ongoing problem that was going to get better. We are now fully staffed, he says, and touch wood, long may that continue. So we're in when we get onto the update report, we're in a much better position to date this year, and I'm hopeful things will continue to stay that way.
Okay, so I'm going to have to change my second question to be more strategic. What's that job market looking like for internal auditors at the moment?
It is a very challenging market. I'm sure my colleagues from Grant Thornton will back me up when I say that recruitment, it can be a bit of a struggle at the moment to find qualified auditors. Indeed, the two people that have retired in the last sort of 6 months or so, when we went out to market, we have a career progression framework for our roles now, so they can come in as qualified or begin as trainees. And we ended up appointing 2 trainees. So there is a very challenging market, but the 2 people that we've got, although they're trainees, they are very keen and they want to prove themselves. So in some ways, it's not a bad thing. We're moulding our own. They're starting on their apprenticeships this month as well, which again I would have mentioned on the next item. So I think we're in a fairly strong position at the moment.
Thank you for that. That's great. That's great, and I really like the idea that we're promoting from within and developing Medway talent. We're not necessarily finding people from outside. Just for Phil, is CMC happy with the amount of resource in internal audit?
I think the situation that Medway finds itself in, probably a lot of local authorities, is we are lean, which means we can plan around the resource that we should have, but when we get shocks like long-term sickness, and the long-term sickness that James is talking about was really, I mean, it was 6 months, wasn't it? Beyond? Was it? Yeah. So that's a whole resource. You know, you cover it somehow, but it's not ideal. And we just haven't. We haven't. There's no contingency built into our establishment. If you've got everyone in post and they're all firing on all cylinders, then we can do the job. But honestly, this year has been horrendous. We seem to have. I don't know. No, I won't say anymore. No.
I suppose that then goes back to a bit of people planning, doesn't it? You know, are we too siloed with people doing jobs in very siloed areas, and the ability to move people around is, well, you know, in the private sector, you might be doing a job, but then you can be moved over. And it's whether we're flexible enough in terms of this, because, you know, there was only a report, I think this week, about sickness in the public sector. It's running at double the number of days in the private sector, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better.
It's interesting you use that word flexibility, because I used the same word today, didn't I, Andy? And we had a meeting of the accountancy team. Obviously, we were talking about how we respond to the resignation of our chief finance officer and what we do in the short term, but whether there was anything that we needed to do longer term, obviously to prepare better for our external audits, how we improve our relationship with directorates, all of that. We talked about all of that kind of stuff. And we recognise that, Andy alluded to it earlier, that we've got some single points of failure. So there are experts in the team. We've got one accountant who is our expert in terms of the HRA, which is a big and complex area of the budget. But we've got no one in the sidelines that's going to pick up the mantle if that person's absent. The collection fund is another very complex and specific area of our business. So one of the questions I posed to the team is, how do we ensure some of that flexibility so that we can respond? And also to be able to respond to peaks and troughs within different parts of the response that came back is, what troughs, you know, which is a fair comment. But yeah, I mean, simple response to your question, we're very lean, and no, I don't think we have the capacity to respond in the event of you know, the unforeseen.
Yeah, it leads on to questions around succession planning, isn't it? You know, schools have problems with when they're sending. Yeah, so I know. I'm just saying, but it does lead on to, you know, going back to those key roles. You've got those single points of failure. We need to be developing our staff.
To that, Chair, that's exactly. I recognised that some years ago, and we've got a pretty well developed trainee scheme within the accountancy function now. We've just appointed another 4, haven't we? And some of that was because we'd promoted the previous cohort. So we're definitely thinking in terms of succession. James has just talked himself about the new recruits that he's brought into the audit team. You know, they're coming in to learn here. I think there is something about getting people in at the bottom and growing your own, because they become committed to this organisation, don't they? And are more willing to want to make their career here. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Vice Chair, please.
I move the recommendation on page 127. The committee is recommended to note the work undertaken by the internal audit team for Medway during the 2024-25. The committee is recommended to consider and support the opinion of the Council's internal control environment provided by the Head of Internal Audit and Counter-Fraud Shared Service as set out in Section 4, Appendix 1, that only limited assurance can be provided that Medway Council's framework of governance, risk management, and system of internal control contributed to the proper, economic, efficient and effective use of resources in achieving the Council's objectives. Is that agreed? Agreed.
Thank you. Can I suggest that we have a comfort break just for a couple of minutes, please? Thank you. Welcome back. Thank you for your indulgence, everybody. We move on to the Internal Audit Update Report. Item 10. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the report at Appendix 1 is the first update on progress for 2025-26. Details the work of the team from the 1st of April to 31st of July 25 and focuses on the plan for quarter 1-2. Now, I'll start with an apology for anything that is highlighted. I'd left them highlighted because they were subject to potential change, and I was on leave literally just before the reporting deadline. And obviously, I took it off, but it didn't save, so apologies for that. They're still highlighted. The figures are correct as of 31st of July because nothing changed. Section 4 on page 161 of your pack shows how our resources have been used over the period and also details the fact we are projecting a loss of 45 days from the resources projected to be available at the start of the year. This is linked to one of the people that retired. It happened slightly later than we expected, which the knock-on effect of that obviously is that the replacement came in slightly later than we originally projected. All details of the reviews from 2024-25 that have been finalised since April are included in the annual report. So the tables in section 5 starting on page 162 focus on the current year only. The tables starting on page 163 detail the other assurance and consultancy activity that has been undertaken by internal audit. We have introduced a new section to report on themes and root causes identified across multiple audits, which is one of the things that came up from the new internal audit standards. But at this stage, there hasn't been sufficient number of reviews finalised to enable a suitable analysis. Now, an update against the team's key performance indicators for this reporting period is provided at section 7 of the report, which starts on page 165. As of today, I can tell you that for IA3, the proportion of agreed assurance assignments delivered is now 15% and the proportion underway is now 19%. So as I say, I think this is possibly one of the best positions we've been in for a couple of years, although it may not seem like it. Section 8 details the review of the plan, and we have addressed the resource losses as part of the process for developing the Q34 plan. Finally, section 9 of the report provides an update in relation to all agreed actions in the table commencing on page 167. Now, the second table starting on page 168 details actions outstanding more than 6 months after their agreed implementation date or because they've failed to meet a revised implementation date. Now, some updates hadn't been received by the reporting deadline. Those that are highlighted yellow still were from previous updates that should have been removed. But I've had an email today from the person that deals with the follow-up to confirm that we've had no further update on those. I'm happy to take any questions that members may have. And if it is relating to actions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Down to me then. The actions that are outstanding over 6 months, James, we've got 2 that I think have been here for quite a considerable amount of time. Can you just remind us what they are, and I'll ask the committee what they want to do about some of them, because I think it's about time we got rid of these off this.
Yes, so the tree service action has, as members will see, has been on the radar since 2022. There were 2 actions relating to trees. One of those was cancelled because the service eventually decided they were going to have to tolerate the level of risk. So there was no point in continually coming backwards and forwards. In this case, sorry about that. In this case, it's to do with an updated policy. The update that's actually on there is highlighted in yellow. That's something that we got back in March, I think. We've got nothing more recent. Some of the others, progress is being made. I mean, the other longest outstanding one is a low priority, and that relates to travel and subsistence to do with VAT. And then there's a high priority one also linked to staff travel and subsistence that's outstanding. We hadn't received an update by the report deadline, and I'm not sure if the service manager's been around because we haven't had an update as of tonight. Obviously, the St Mary's action, they have done it. They have it because it's high priority. We require evidence before we can sign it off. They've assured us it's done. They're having some issues getting evidence from the online banking. And the petty cash audit, as you can see, there's lots of bullet points in there. Majority of them are actually done. We probably possibly should have separated these out as separate actions, but the majority of those points are done. There's one thing outstanding, which I think there's a couple of bits outstanding. The actual decision on whether to continue using petty cash has not been made yet, and they are holding off something on one of them because there is a pilot going on at the moment with travel warrants. So obviously that relates to the guidance. They don't want to update guidance because if this pilot becomes something that is going to happen, is going to become the normal practice, obviously they don't want the guidance to reflect that. So they've held off slightly on writing that guidance while they're sorting that out.
Right. So from the tone of what you just said and the fact that there is a pilot going on, there are some of those things that are low priority or are being actioned. So I think the committee could be quite happy about that. Personally, I'm not happy about the fact that there's a policy that's needed since 2022, 23, whatever. And I move that we make a decision tonight that if there is no update or a policy decision coming to, if this isn't cleared by the January meeting, I move that we ask the director to come and account for why this is still outstanding. It's a policy. I'm not asking them to go down and cut out trees, put on. Will be very concerned.
He will be very concerned.
Yeah, so that's, I'm moving that on behalf of the committee. Is there an agreement that if we don't have this policy?
Chair, it does say it will be reported to Cabinet before September 2025. So.
Yeah, that as I say, that's based upon the update we received in March. I haven't seen the Cabinet paper. I've not seen the Cabinet paper, so I don't know if it's on there. But obviously, we've not had an update to confirm whether or not it has progressed. That was obviously where they expected it at that point in time.
Cabinet, then it comes off here anyway. Yeah. Can I ask that Steve creates a form of words for that to make it proper? Thank you.
I move the recommendation on page 157. The committee is recommended to note the outputs and performance against the internal audit plan for quarter 1-2 for the period 1st of April to 31st of July 2025 as detailed at Appendix 1. The committee is recommended to agree the revisions to the internal audit plan quarter 1-2 2025-26 as detailed in section 8 of Appendix 1. And Democratic Service Officer.
Chair, I'd just say I will send something round to members tomorrow to agree by email if everyone's happy with that. Yeah.
Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Move on to item 11, the internal plan, Q3 for 25-26, James.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the proposed plan for Q3, Q4 is presented at Appendix 1 and starts on page 173, although the reviews themselves are listed in the tables commencing on page 177. Now, our risk assessment was refreshed in July, along with updates to the level of resource expected to be available and obviously the draft plan prepared. Now, overall, the number of reviews that are going to be used to produce a formal opinion that were predicted to be undertaken during the year has remained the same. To look at that 45-day loss, we've amended some allowances for other work to compensate, but we want to make sure that we deliver sufficient assurance work. The plan itself continues to be focused on the highest areas of risk to provide the necessary assurance to the Council, and as with the plan for Q1-2, each review has been assigned an indicative figure of 15 days for planning purposes, but the internal audit manager will have freedom to reduce or increase the allocated budget to ensure that the review provides the right level of assurance. Now, I'm now seeking the committee's approval for the proposed plan for Q3-4, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just a formality. I move the recommendation on page 171. The committee is recommended to approve the internal audit plan for Q3-4, 2025-26, presented at Appendix 1. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
You again, James. Item 12, the Counter Fraud Annual Report 24-25.
Thank you, Chair. Time for the other half of the service. The annual report for counter fraud, which can be found at Appendix 1, outlines the performance of the team against the agreed work plan for 24-25 and brings together the information, again, as with the internal audit, brings together the information provided in the update reports to the committee during the year, along with anything completed since the last update. Now, Section 3, starting on page 184, has been introduced to try and provide some context. Sorry, we introduced it last year. I do apologise. So this is to provide some context around national reports on fraud. Section 4, starting on page 185, details the resources available to the team during the year. Now, the projected resources at the start of the year, again, taking into account working days, less annual leave, etc., was 555 days were projected to be available. However, only 305.4 days of chargeable activity were undertaken due to resourcing impacts with staff vacancies, and one of those being as a comment to internal audit. Preempting the likely question, we seconded an officer to internal audit in August when one of our auditors left, and then we lost an investigator to Greenwich. They quickly followed the auditor that left in August, so we were 2 down effectively. Again, just before the end of the financial year, though, we did recruit and we're back to full strength. So of the chargeable time, 2.3% was spent on fraud awareness and prevention, 26% on proactive counter-fraud activity, 54.6% on investigative activity and 17% on other counter-fraud activity. Section 5, starting on page 186, provides details of all the work undertaken in the areas under the fraud awareness and prevention category. Members will be aware that we presented the first fraud risk register earlier this year, and the highest scoring areas are noted in this report. Section 6 on page 187 details the proactive activity that has been undertaken, which mainly relates to the National Fraud Initiative exercise. And there is some brief information related to this, but members received the annual report for NFI in July. We also undertook visits to right-to-buy applicants and managed to prevent a sale that had false information provided. And our blue badge work with parking enforcement also led to some very positive results. Section 7, starting on page 188, provides a summary of the results from investigations undertaken during the year, including the savings identified and other actions, such as the recovery of one council property, the cancellation of a temporary accommodation placement, and school places that were withdrawn. Section 8 gives a brief summary of the other counter-fraud activity linked to liaison with the DWP and other investigative bodies. The team had 11 performance measures for 2024-25, which are detailed in the table at section 9, starting on page 190. And members will note there has been reasonably good performance in all areas despite the impact on resources. So I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
Councillor Hackwell, sorry.
That's right. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, James, for the report and the narrative. Just one, I've read somewhere in the report that all the sessions, apart from one on fraud awareness training, were cancelled. What are we going to do differently to make sure that you get some engagement in the future?
Yes, it's very difficult. The sessions aren't mandatory, and that's partly because I don't have enough staff to run sessions that would cover sort of 2,000 employees. However, we've done what we can to try and publicise these, but the reason they've been cancelled basically is because we've not had enough people sign up. If there's only 1 or 2 people, there's not any point in running the session. We do offer to do service. This is the generic stuff, you know, how does fraud impact the council, that anyone can attend. We do offer services, the opportunity for us to come along to team meetings to talk about fraud risks within those services, such as council tax, housing, that kind of thing. Social care, we're actually got in the pipeline for this year, we've got a lot of work coming down the line for social care. We are, as a consequence of some of that, as I was going to talk about in the update report, we are now looking at some digital solutions, because if we can do that, that will then become compulsory for all staff, because they can do it at their own, in their own time, as it were, at their leisure. So rather than attending a specific session with us, that also means I haven't got to try and resource it. So that's something we're looking at the moment.
Councillor Nestrop, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I actually had a few questions, but you preemptively answered one of them, and that was my second one. I have a few more. First of all, I wanted to ask about the blue badge misuse. I actually got an email recently for a resident about some of their neighbors parking their car in the disabled spot with the disabled badge that does not correspond to the person, and then switching the cars around with the badge and stuff like that. So what are we doing to tackle that? I see that in the report it says that 23% of cases tested show misuse of blue badge. Is that a wider issue in Medway?
Nationally, it was estimated that around 20% of badges are subject to some form of misuse or fraud. So, I mean, we were actually surprised at the level that we got. As I say, it was about, we checked over 100 badges, and over somewhere in the region of 24, 25 were being misused. Now, I can possibly guess exactly which address you've had a report about, because I have someone contact me on a semi-regular basis. The difficulty you have is the disabled bay they're talking about is one that's been put outside someone's home. So the vehicle is parked close, so that, because it could be any family member that has to take them out. If they live at the address or not, they could be there to take them out. So the vehicle is there if they have to get the individual from the home into the car. They can't have it half a mile up the road, kind of thing. Morally, is it wrong? Possibly, yes. But legally, no. And this is the kind of the debate I have with the gentleman who operates a care home not far from this particular address. In that case, the gentleman that's disabled lives there. He's quite elderly. His son also lives in the same house, and the son parks his car. But the son can legitimately do that because that is the vehicle that is needed to take his dad out. So, you know, it's very difficult. Are they doing anything wrong? Not technically, although it is frustrating. I can appreciate it's frustrating to people.
Residents, yeah, they're getting frustrated. But yeah, that's good information. I actually didn't know that, and maybe next time I receive an email from a resident, I can just answer directly instead of getting the council engaged. Another question that I have is about the high risk area, like housing separating, false homelessness claim, misuse of social care payment. Are we doing something specific to tackle these areas as well?
Yes, we are looking at those areas. So I mentioned that we've got some work coming down the line with social care. The Fighting Fraud and Corruption Locally Board, which is a national board, produced a toolkit around social care fraud. So at the moment we are working with the adult social care teams to do lots of awareness sessions with their staff around potential for direct payment fraud and things like that. We're hoping that will prompt more understanding and maybe some referrals from that service because we don't get very many. In terms of housing, we're going to be part of a pilot along with the rest of the districts in Kent to do some work around temporary accommodation and housing waiting lists. So what we're going to be looking for is people that are or have attempted to get onto the registers of more than one council or have secured temporary accommodation from more than one council because they can't be living in two places. So that's all coming down the chain. We haven't done the data submissions yet. We're currently doing all the necessary checks and balances on the data protection impacts and things like that. And then once that's all agreed, we'll be moving forward with the pilot. If the pilot is successful, there's only going to be 20 authorities involved, but through the Kent Intelligence Network, I kind of made the case that all the Kent authorities should be involved because I think if that's going to happen, the likelihood is it's going to be in a closer geography than, say, the other end of the country. So that's coming down the line again very soon.
Thank you. And final question, that's really helpful actually. Funny enough, in the report it says that 41% of reported crime nationally fraud. It's a massive percentage. I was not aware of that. And my question is about new technology and AI. Obviously, it's everywhere now. People use it. What are we doing to get the best new technology to identify this fraud on time?
That's a very difficult one to answer. You're right. I mean, cyber-enabled fraud has been something that everyone's been aware of for a few years now. AI-enabled fraud is becoming, it's relatively new, but it's gathering pace big time. In terms of how do we respond to it, it's a good question. We've got to keep pace. Do we necessarily have the technology available to us that we need to combat it? For local authorities, possibly not, but then a lot of the private sector possibly doesn't either yet. I mean, the latest one I've seen is to do with resale sites like Vinted. Someone will sell an item of clothing, so the third party will pay them for it. The next thing, that third party lodges a complaint with Vinted saying that the item was damaged, and they've used AI to create a picture of that item of clothing with significant tears, burns, things like that. Vinted, as I understand it from the things I've seen on LinkedIn and other platforms, Vinted then say, right, you have to refund this person their money, but they're under no obligation to send the item back to you. So that person's effectively got something for free and you're, you know, in theory out of pocket. So that's a new thing that's come up. So AI-enabled fraud is on the increase very, very sharply. You've got, I actually attended a webinar today, and obviously with AI, it can mimic voices as well. So they're talking about generative AI, you know, that's increasing the possibility that phishing attacks could be more successful. Gone are the days of, you know, your scam email that's written very badly because you're using AI to write them. So things are written better, you know, you haven't got the telltale poor spelling on the emails to give you that clue that it's not right. So yeah, it's a big problem. How we address it, at the moment, it's very difficult.
Actually, almost got fooled by an AI a few days ago. It had a very nice accent, very nice voice, and you couldn't tell it's AI. The only reason I could tell it's AI, because it repeated the same phrase with the same intonation, and then I realized I'm talking to a bot, not a real person. Amazing. But yeah, thank you very much.
James, I've just got one question, and it kind of goes back to when we were talking about speak-up policies and investigations and grievances. I see that we've got approximately 2 FTEs dedicated to internal grievance and disciplinary investigations. Is that demand still there?
We are still working on cases, yes, because obviously things come in at different times. So yes, if that 2 FTE is there for internal investigations, but if they don't, if they were to have a lack of casework, as it were, from those, they would carry on with, they would pitch in with the fraud work. So we kind of moved the resource where we need it, although the additional resource was brought in for that purpose based on the average number of cases and how long they were projected to take and things like that. Going back to what was being discussed earlier, obviously for something to be classified as a whistleblower, there has to be unethical behaviour, things like that, or corruption, fraud. Some people report things as a whistleblower, but it's a conduct issue. It's not something that will be classified as whistleblower because it's not a criminal offence, it's not unethical conduct, etc. And that's what they were talking about in terms of the whistleblowing group. Review the referrals that come in. Should it be classified as a whistleblower, or does it need to be dealt with under the council's code of conduct, disciplinary policies, grievance policies, things like that? So that's kind of where it all fits in. But the team do deal with those internal investigations, yeah.
Thank you for that, James. Actually, you answered the question that I asked Vipinda earlier, which was about thresholds and stuff and why we're getting a 0 on the whistleblowing. And that's really, really helpful, I think, for the committee to have that granular answer. Thank you. Vice Chair, please.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation on page 181. The committee is recommended to note the work undertaken by the counter-fraud team from Medway during 2024-25 in providing an effective service to the council. Is that agreed?
Agreed. Now, item 13, the counter-fraud update report, James.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, so the report at Appendix 1 is the first update on progress against the plan for 2025-26, and this covers the work of the counter-fraud team from 1st of April to 31st of July. Section 3, starting on page 196 of your pack, shows how resources have been used over the period, detailing the level of time spent on each of the key areas outlined in the plan. The tables in Section 4, commencing on page 198, provide an overview of the work undertaken in each of those areas. Now, for fraud awareness and prevention, we have been making sessions available for staff on a monthly basis. Well, actually, we moved them to quarterly, thinking about it. But again, we've not had that sign up, which is why we are now moving to looking at those digital solutions. There are a few products out there that aren't overly expensive, so we're going to be looking at what we can do about that. We have, however, been engaging with the public at the Medway live events. So we were at the 100 of Who Academy in April, and we will be at Mid-Kent College next month to talk to members of the public when they're there. In terms of proactive counter-fraud activity, the NFI exercises are progressing, and we've been continuing to look at right to buys, TA placements, and obviously there's been more blue badge activity as well. The table commencing on page 199 shows the summary of results from external investigations and the associated savings, and the table on page 200 also shows activity connected to potential staff fraud, including the successful prosecution relating to a contractor. Now, I will point out all monies connected to that case have been recovered. There is a brief summary of the counter-fraud activity in the table, also starting on page 200. And an update against the team's key performance indicators for the reporting period is provided at section 5 of the report, which is on page 202. Now, only 24 investigations have been concluded in the period, with associated cashable savings of 30,689. I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
Thank you for a very comprehensive report. I don't think we have any questions for it. James?
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation on page 193. The committee is recommended to note the outputs and performance of the counter-fraud team for Medway for the period 1st of April to 31st of July 2025 as detailed in Appendix 1. Is that agreed?
Agreed. Thanks. Move now to the final item, which is the counter fraud and corruption strategy for 2025. And I'll ask James to introduce this one as well.
Thank you, Chair. So the Council has had a counter fraud and corruption strategy for a number of years, even longer than I've been here. Now, it's subject to annual review, and this year there have been significant changes, although these changes are more about the appearance of the document rather than the message in the content. In hindsight, it may have been advisable to include a copy of the previous version for comparison purposes, but it is available on the Council website at the moment and will remain there until this one is formally approved. Now, the new Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act 2023 introduces a new offence of failing to prevent fraud. An organisation's only defence is to show that they had reasonable prevention procedures in place, and this strategy sets the tone from the top in relation to fraud prevention. Now, the changes to the strategy are to make it much clearer to those who need to read it, and it now includes a dedicated fraud response plan. Previously, our response was kind of incorporated into the main body of the document, which obviously made it very long and things weren't abundantly clear. Now, obviously, if we ever had to prepare to defend ourselves against that new offence, we want to make sure that we can show we've got everything in place. As I say, the fraud response has always been in there, but I mean, I wrote the previous strategy, but I think too many words. Now we've broken it down with appendices. It's a bit more reader-friendly for staff to read. I mean, we do the annual surveys and it says, have you read the strategy? And so many people were saying no. Having sat down to look at it myself recently, I went, I'm not surprised why. So this is an opportunity for the committee to provide any feedback before it goes to Cabinet and ultimately full council as the strategy forms part of the Constitution. I'm happy to take any questions members may have. If you've got any feedback on any of it as well, we'll try and incorporate that. A lot of it is based on best practice and, again, looking around at what others have done as well.
Any questions? Again, thank you, James, for the report and also for explaining the aims of the document in bullet points. We do like being able to understand them quickly. So thank you for that, and best of luck with getting people to read it. May I ask the Vice Chair to finally?
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation at page 203. The committee is recommended to consider the counter fraud and corruption strategy document presented at Appendix 1 and recommended approval by full council. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. It's agreed, Chair.
Thank you. The meeting is now closed and I thank you all. Thank you.